Ma'am, you need to turn that off right now. I will not ask you again.
The flight attendant's voice cut through the cabin like a slap. Ma'am, I need you to gather your things. This seat belongs to someone else. Every head in first class turned. A woman in designer sunglasses laughed out loud and said, loud enough for the whole cabin to hear, I knew something looked wrong the moment she sat down. Dr. Naomi Carter did not move. She did not raise her voice. She simply reached into her bag, pulled out her boarding pass, and set it calmly on her tray table. But before the attendant could even look at it, the cockpit door opened. The captain himself stepped out, walked straight past first-class rows of confused passengers, stopped in front of Naomi, extended his hand, and said the words that made the entire cabin go silent. Miss Carter, it is the honor of my career to fly you home today. Nobody in that cabin had any idea who she really was. And in the next 60 seconds, one woman's whole world was about to fall apart. If you're already hooked, do me a quick favor before we dive in. Hit that like button, subscribe if you're new here, and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from tonight. Now let's get back to Naomi. Naomi Carter had learned a long time ago that silence could be more powerful than any shout. She had learned it in boardrooms where men twice her age dismissed her ideas until the numbers proved them wrong. She had learned it in banks, where loan officers looked at her business plan and then looked at her skin and decided the two did not match. She had learned it most of all in a small apartment in Atlanta, where her mother worked double shifts as a hospital janitor while raising 2 daughters alone, because the man who was supposed to help had chosen his own dreams over his family. That morning, Naomi had boarded Meridian Airlines Flight 218 from Atlanta to New York, wearing jeans, sneakers, and a plain gray hoodie. She was 38 years old, and she had exactly one rule when she traveled for business that mattered. Dress down. Watch how people treat you when they think you have nothing. It told her more about a company, a city, or a deal than any spreadsheet ever could. She settled into seat 2A, tucked her bag beneath the seat in front of her, and pulled out her tablet to review the documents that had kept her awake most of the night. In exactly 6 hours, she was due at a shareholder meeting that would decide the fate of an airline with 14,000 employees. An airline her late grandfather had once dreamed of working for as a young mechanic in the 1960s, before segregation laws kept him out of the hangar entirely. The seat beside her remained empty as boarding continued, and Naomi welcomed the quiet. She needed to think. In less than a day, a man named Richard Vance was going to attempt something that could gut this airline down to nothing, sell off its most profitable routes, lay off thousands of workers, and walk away with a payout large enough to buy an island. Naomi intended to stop him, but first she had a flight to survive. A woman swept into seat 2B in a cloud of expensive perfume, dressed head to toe in cream-colored cashmere, diamonds glittering at her ears. She glanced at Naomi once, quick and dismissive, the way someone glances at a stain on a tablecloth, and then turned her attention to her phone. Naomi recognized the type immediately. Old money, or money trying very hard to look old. She did not think much of it. She had flown beside 1,000 women like this one. What she did not know yet was that the woman's name was Victoria Sinclair Vance, and she was married to the very man Naomi had flown across the country to stop. The flight attendant working first class that day was a young woman named Brittany Cole, sharp-featured, blonde, with the kind of polished smile that never quite reached her eyes. Brittany had been working Meridian's premium cabins for 3 years, and in that time she had developed a private, unspoken habit of deciding who deserved to be there and who did not. She would never have called it prejudice. She called it instinct. She was wrong, and that mistake was about to cost her everything. "Can I get you something to drink before takeoff?" Brittany asked Victoria first, her voice warm as honey. Champagne, please. And keep it coming, Victoria said without looking up. Brittany turned to Naomi next, and her tone shifted, subtle but unmistakable, the way a person's voice changes when they believe they are speaking to someone beneath them. And you, hun? Water's fine, right? Naomi looked up from her tablet and smiled politely. Orange juice, please, no ice. Brittany hesitated a half-second too long, glanced down at Naomi's sneakers, her jeans, the plain silver watch on her wrist, and then walked away without writing anything down. 10 minutes before takeoff, a well-dressed man in a navy suit approached row 2, checked his boarding pass, checked it again, and frowned. "Excuse me," he said to Naomi. "I believe you might be in my seat. This is 2A. Naomi glanced at her own boarding pass, still sitting on the tray table where she had placed it earlier. "I'm sorry. This is my assigned seat, 2A. Maybe there's been a mix-up." The man's frown deepened, and Victoria, overhearing, leaned across the aisle with a thin smile. "It happens more than you'd think," she said, loud enough for nearby rows to hear. "Sometimes the system gets confused. Might be worth double-checking that pass, sweetheart." The word sweetheart landed like a small, deliberate cut. Naomi felt the heat rise in her chest, the old familiar burn of being spoken to like a child, like a mistake, like a problem to be solved before the important people could get comfortable. She had felt it 1,000 times before. She breathed through it the way she always did. Brittany arrived at that moment, drawn by the small commotion, and rather than checking the seating chart on her tablet first, she looked at Naomi, then at the confused man in the suit, and made her decision in an instant. "Ma'am, can I see your boarding pass?" Sometimes there are mix-ups with upgrades and complimentary seating. The word complimentary hung in the air, heavy with implication. Naomi understood exactly what Brittany meant. Not a paying passenger, a charity case, a mistake someone made at the gate. Naomi handed over her boarding pass without a word. Brittany scanned it with her handheld device, and the screen blinked green, confirming seat 2A, confirmed and paid in full, first-class fare. But instead of apologizing to Naomi and correcting the confused man, Brittany's face flushed, and rather than admit an error might exist on the system's end, she doubled down. "I'm going to need to check with my supervisor," Brittany said stiffly. "Sometimes our system doesn't update properly with special accommodation seats. Ma'am, would you mind stepping to the galley for just a moment while I sort this out?" Naomi felt every eye in first class settle on her. She could have made a scene. She could have pulled out her phone and shown them exactly who she was in 30 seconds. Instead, she folded her hands calmly in her lap and said, "I'll wait right here. My seat is 2A. You're welcome to check with whoever you need to check with." Victoria laughed softly behind her champagne glass. "It's fine, Brittany. Don't make a whole thing of it. Just move her to economy if there's a real ticket holder waiting. I'm sure she'll understand." The words hit harder than Naomi expected, not because they were cruel, though they were, but because of how casually cruel they were, how effortless it seemed for Victoria to erase her, to assume, without a shred of evidence, that a black woman in sneakers could not possibly have paid full price for a first-class seat. Brittany, emboldened by Victoria's approval, straightened her shoulders. "I really am going to need you to gather your things, ma'am. We have a paying customer whose seat may have been double booked, and out of caution, I think it's best if you relocate while we confirm." "Confirm what, exactly?" Naomi asked quietly. "You already scanned my pass. It came back green." "Sometimes the system glitches," Brittany insisted, though her voice wavered slightly now. "I just want to make sure everyone who's supposed to be in first class is actually supposed to be in first class." The man in the navy suit, increasingly uncomfortable, cleared his throat. "Look, maybe this is my mistake. My assistant booked the flight. Maybe there was an error on my end. But it was too late. Brittany, unwilling to back down in front of Victoria, doubled down harder. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to insist. If you'd please gather your things." That was the moment the cockpit door opened. Captain James Whitfield stepped out into the aisle, tall, silver-haired, 62 years old, 31 years flying for Meridian Airlines. He had done his final pre-flight checks and stepped out to stretch his legs before pushback, a small habit he had kept for 3 decades. He took one look at the tense scene in row 2, and then his eyes landed on Naomi Carter, and his entire posture changed. "Ms. Carter," he said, and the warmth in his voice was unmistakable, immediate, real. "I had no idea you were flying with us today. It is genuinely the honor of my career to have you on this aircraft." The cabin went dead silent. Brittany's hand, still holding her scanner, froze mid-air. Victoria's champagne glass paused halfway to her lips. The man in the navy suit looked between the captain and Naomi with an expression of dawning horror. "Captain Whitfield," Naomi said warmly, standing to shake his hand. "It's good to see you again. How's your granddaughter? Still wanting to be a pilot?" "She talks about nothing else," he said, laughing. "Miss Carter, is there anything at all I can do to make this flight comfortable for you? Anything you need?" Brittany's voice came out small and cracked. "Miss Carter?" Captain Whitfield turned to her, his expression shifting from warmth to something colder, sharper. "Brittany, is there a problem with Miss Carter's seating?" There was some confusion with the boarding passes, sir. I was just trying to—" "Miss Carter," the captain said, turning back to Naomi, his voice gentle again, "owns 42% of this airline's parent company. She personally led the investment that kept Meridian flying during the bankruptcy restructuring 5 years ago. 14,000 of us still have jobs because of decisions she made in a boardroom most of us never saw." Naomi raised a hand gently. "James, please, it's fine. I don't need a scene." "With respect, Miss Carter, I think a scene already happened," Captain Whitfield said, glancing pointedly at Brittany. "And it wasn't the one you started." Victoria Sinclair Vance had gone very pale. She set her champagne glass down carefully, as though it had suddenly become fragile, and Naomi noticed the shift immediately, the calculation happening behind her eyes. Victoria was putting pieces together. Carter Holdings. The name that had been mentioned in hushed, worried tones at her husband's dinner table for the past 3 weeks. "I'm sorry," Victoria said slowly, forcing a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Did you say Carter? As in Naomi Carter? Of Carter Strategic Holdings?" "That's right," Naomi said simply, settling back into her seat. "My husband is Richard Vance," Victoria said, her voice tightening. "He sits on Meridian's board." Naomi's expression did not change, though internally, something clicked into place with quiet, cold clarity. Of course this was not a coincidence. Victoria had not simply been cruel by accident. She had been cruel because some small, threatened part of her already sensed exactly who Naomi was and what she represented. A woman with the power to end her husband's plans. A woman who did not need Richard Vance's approval, his money, or his last name to matter in the world. "Small world," Naomi said pleasantly, and picked her tablet back up. Brittany, mortified, attempted an apology. "Miss Carter, I am so sorry. I didn't mean to." "You didn't check the system before you accused a paying passenger of not belonging in her own seat," Naomi said, not unkindly, but firmly. "That's not about me. Think about how many other passengers you've done that to, who didn't have a captain who recognized them." Brittany's face crumpled slightly, and for the first time, real understanding seemed to settle into her expression. "You're right," she said quietly. "I'm sorry." Captain Whitfield returned to the cockpit. The plane pushed back from the gate, and the flight to New York began in a cabin thick with a silence that felt entirely different from the one Naomi had wanted, just 20 minutes earlier. To understand why that shareholder meeting mattered so much, and why Richard Vance's name made Naomi's stomach tighten the way it did, you have to go back 17 years, to a cramped two-bedroom apartment on the south side of Atlanta, where a 9-year-old girl named Naomi sat on a windowsill every evening, watching for a car that never came. Her father, Marcus Carter, had been a brilliant man, self-taught in aviation mechanics, obsessed since childhood with airplanes, engines, the physics of flight. He had worked his way up from baggage handler to junior mechanic at a small regional airline, and he used to tell young Naomi that one day he would own an airline of his own, that their family name would be painted on the side of a plane. Naomi had believed him completely. Children always believe their fathers, until the day they learn not to. When Naomi was 10, Marcus left. Not slowly, not with a long, painful goodbye, but suddenly, in the middle of the night, chasing an investment opportunity with a business partner in Texas that promised to make him rich within a year. He promised Naomi's mother, Dolores, that he would send for them once things were settled. He promised Naomi he would be back before her next birthday with an airplane ticket in his hand. He never came back. The investment failed. Marcus drifted from city to city, chasing one scheme after another, occasionally sending a card with no return address, occasionally calling on a birthday, always promising, never delivering. Dolores worked 2 jobs to keep Naomi and her younger sister Renee fed and housed, and Naomi watched her mother's hands crack and bleed from industrial cleaning chemicals every single week, and she made herself a promise standing at that windowsill. She would never depend on anyone who could simply choose to stop showing up. She would build something so solid, so entirely her own, that no one could ever abandon her out of it. Naomi remembered one night in particular, when she was 11, sitting at the small kitchen table doing homework by the light of a single bulb because Dolores was trying to save on the electric bill. Her mother had come home past midnight, smelling of bleach and floor wax, her uniform stiff with the long hours of a double shift, and she had found Naomi still awake, staring at a math problem she already understood, but had left unfinished simply so she would have an excuse to wait up. Dolores had not scolded her. She had sat down across from her daughter, taken her small hands in her own cracked ones, and said something Naomi carried with her for the rest of her life. "Baby, people are going to show you exactly who they are if you pay attention. Your daddy showed you. Don't spend your whole life waiting on somebody to become who you wish they were. Spend it becoming exactly who you decide to be." Naomi had not fully understood the weight of those words at 11 years old, but she understood them completely now. Every single time she walked into a room where someone had already decided, based on nothing but a glance, exactly who she must be. Dolores had passed away 6 years ago, from a heart weakened by decades of exhausting labor and stress, just 18 months before Naomi closed the Meridian deal. She had never gotten to see her daughter save 14,000 jobs, never gotten to see the mechanic apprenticeship hangar bear her husband's father's name, never gotten to see Naomi stand at the front of a boardroom that once would not have let her clean its floors, let alone lead it. Naomi thought of her mother often in moments like these, in the quiet after a battle won, and she liked to believe, in the private way people believe things they cannot prove, that Dolores was somewhere watching, finally allowed to rest. She studied relentlessly, earned a full scholarship to Georgia Tech, then an MBA from Wharton, working 3 jobs through both to send money home. She started her first company at 26, a logistics analytics firm that predicted supply chain failures before they happened, and sold it for $11 million at 29. She used that money to found Carter Strategic Holdings, a firm that specialized in something most investors avoided entirely: distressed transportation companies, businesses everyone else considered too risky, too broken, too far gone to save. Meridian Airlines had been exactly that kind of company 5 years ago. Buried in debt, hemorrhaging cash, weeks from bankruptcy liquidation that would have cost 14,000 people their jobs overnight. Naomi had walked into that boardroom, the only woman in the room, the only black executive at that table, and laid out a restructuring plan so precise, so ruthlessly intelligent, that the existing board had no choice but to accept her terms. She invested $180 million of her own capital in exchange for a 42% stake and a permanent board seat. She had saved that airline once already. Now, 5 years later, Richard Vance, a board member who had opposed her rescue plan from the very beginning, was quietly maneuvering to sell Meridian's most profitable routes and assets to a private equity firm called Halcyon Capital, a firm known throughout the industry for stripping companies for parts, laying off workforces, and walking away with enormous profits while leaving communities and employees devastated. Vance had spent the last 8 months building support among smaller shareholders, promising them an enormous short-term payout if the sale went through. He needed just one more vote to reach the majority he required. A vote from a shareholder named Diane Osei, an elderly woman who had inherited her stake from her late husband and had grown tired, weary of boardroom battles, ready to sell and simply be done with it. The emergency shareholder meeting had been called for 4 o'clock that afternoon in New York. Naomi had exactly one goal on this flight: reach Diane Osei before Vance's people could finalize her vote, and convince her that selling Meridian to Halcyon Capital would not just cost 14,000 people their jobs, it would erase the very legacy her late husband had helped build. Somewhere over Virginia, Victoria leaned across the aisle, her earlier hostility replaced now with something more calculated, almost pleading. "Miss Carter, I hope there are no hard feelings about earlier. I truly didn't realize who you were. Would it have mattered if I was just a regular passenger?" Naomi asked, not looking up from her tablet. Victoria opened her mouth, then closed it, unable to find an honest answer that did not condemn her. "That's what I thought," Naomi said quietly, and returned to her documents. But Victoria was not finished. Desperation had crept into her voice now, thin and brittle beneath the cashmere and diamonds. "My husband is a good man, Miss Carter. He's just trying to secure our family's future. This sale, it isn't personal, it's simply good business. Selling 14,000 people's futures to secure your own is exactly personal," Naomi said. "It's just not your personal cost you're calculating." Victoria's eyes flashed. "You don't understand the pressure Richard is under. Halcyon has threatened to go after his other holdings if this deal falls through. We stand to lose everything if it doesn't happen." Naomi finally turned to look at her directly, and something in her calm, steady gaze made Victoria shrink slightly in her seat. "Mrs. Vance, I built this company back from nothing when everyone else had already decided it was dead. I did that while men like your husband sat in boardrooms, telling me a woman who grew up on food stamps in Atlanta couldn't possibly understand aviation finance. I understand pressure. I understand exactly what it costs to lose everything, because I've lived it. What I won't do is let your husband's pressure become 14,000 families' catastrophe." Victoria had no response. She turned back to her champagne, and for the remainder of the flight, she did not speak again. 3 hours into the flight, Naomi's phone, connected to the plane's Wi-Fi, buzzed with an incoming message from her chief of staff, a sharp, loyal woman named Priya Nandan, who had worked alongside Naomi for 9 years. Priya's message contained a single line that made Naomi's stomach drop. "Diane Osei's attorney just filed paperwork. She's meeting with Vance's team at 3 o'clock, 1 hour before the shareholder meeting. If he gets her signature before you land, the vote is decided before it even happens." Naomi checked the flight tracker. They were still 2 hours out from landing, with the meeting scheduled to begin 1 hour after that meeting between Diane and Vance's team. The math was brutal. Even if the flight landed early, even if traffic cooperated perfectly, Naomi might reach the shareholder meeting only after Diane Osei had already signed away her vote. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing slowly, the way she had trained herself to do under pressure since she was 22 years old, and pitching her first investors, all of whom had doubted her before she opened her mouth. She typed back to Priya, "Send Diane a message from me directly, personal, not corporate. Remind her of the promise her husband made to the mechanics union in 2019. Tell her I'm on my way and I'm asking her, one person to another, to wait until I land before she signs anything." Priya responded within minutes. Sent, but her attorney is pushing hard. Vance's people offered her an extra $2 million in the buyout if she signs before the shareholder meeting starts. I don't think sentiment is going to be enough this time. Naomi stared out the window at the clouds below, and for the first time in years, she felt something close to real fear. Not for herself, but for every mechanic, every flight attendant, every gate agent, every baggage handler whose entire livelihood now rested on whether an 81-year-old woman could resist a $2 million bribe in the next 90 minutes. Then her phone buzzed again, this time with a call, not a message. The caller ID made her breath catch entirely. Marcus Carter. Her father had not called her in 4 years. The last conversation between them had ended badly. Naomi telling him, calmly but finally, that she was done waiting for apologies that never fully arrived, done accepting half-hearted excuses, dressed up as remorse. She had built an empire specifically so she would never again need anything from a man who had taught her, more than anyone else in her life, exactly what abandonment felt like. She let it ring twice before answering. Dad. Naomi. His voice sounded older than she remembered, rougher, tired, in a way that made something ache reluctantly in her chest, despite everything. I need to talk to you. It's about Richard Vance. Naomi's entire body went still. How do you know that name? Because I've been consulting for him for the past year, Marcus said, and the shame in his voice was unmistakable, thick and heavy. I didn't know it was your company. He was trying to take apart until 3 days ago. Naomi, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen before that meeting happens. Because what Vance is planning is worse than you think. You're consulting for the man trying to destroy the company I nearly bankrupted myself saving, Naomi said, her voice dangerously quiet. The company my grandfather, your own father, was never even allowed to work in because of his skin, back when segregation kept him sweeping hangar floors instead of fixing engines. You're helping tear that down. I didn't know, Marcus said again, desperate now. Vance approached me 18 months ago through an aviation consulting firm. I've spent the last 20 years trying to rebuild some kind of career in this industry. After everything fell apart, Naomi, you know that. He hired me to help identify undervalued routes for a potential acquisition target. I had no idea the target was Meridian until the due diligence documents came through, with Carter Strategic Holdings listed as the majority shareholder. I saw your name, Naomi. I saw your name on those documents, and I felt sick. You should feel sick, Naomi said. But that doesn't change anything. You're still helping him. I quit 3 days ago, Marcus said quickly. The moment I understood what was happening, I resigned from the consulting contract. But Naomi, listen to me. That's not why I'm calling. I know things about Richard Vance that could stop this entire deal cold. Things that go far beyond one bad shareholder vote. Naomi's jaw tightened. Part of her, the part still 9 years old on that windowsill, wanted desperately to hang up, to refuse this man one more chance to disappoint her. But the businesswoman in her, the one who had learned to separate emotion from strategy in every boardroom she had ever walked into, forced her to stay on the line. Talk, she said. Vance has been falsifying safety inspection reports on 3 of Meridian's regional aircraft for the past 2 years, Marcus said, the words tumbling out now. Urgent. I found the discrepancies while reviewing maintenance logs for the acquisition analysis. He's been cutting corners on mandatory inspections to inflate the operational numbers, make the fleet look more profitable and efficient than it actually is, specifically to drive up the sale price for Halcyon. Naomi, those planes are still flying. People are still flying on them every single day, and they haven't received inspections they legally require. Naomi felt the blood drain from her face. This was no longer simply a battle over shareholder votes and quarterly profits. This was about lives. Ordinary people boarding planes every day, trusting that the machines carrying them through the sky had been properly maintained. Do you have proof? She asked, her voice sharp now, entirely focused. I have copies of the falsified logs, Marcus said. I made copies the moment I realized what I was looking at, before I resigned, because I knew Vance would destroy the originals the second he suspected anyone had seen them. I have everything, Naomi. I can send it to you right now. Send it to Priya Nandan immediately, Naomi said, already pulling up Priya's contact information. And Dad, if you're lying to me, if this is some kind of play to get back into my life through the back door. I'm not lying, Marcus said, and his voice cracked in a way Naomi had never heard before, not once in her entire life. I have spent 28 years failing you as a father. I am not going to compound that by letting people die on planes I helped make look safer than they are. Whatever happens between us, whatever you decide about me after today, please, just stop this deal. Naomi hung up without saying goodbye, not out of cruelty, but because she genuinely did not know, in that moment, what to say to the father who had broken her heart 100 times over, and might now, impossibly, be handing her the exact weapon she needed to save 14,000 jobs and possibly hundreds of lives. She immediately called Priya. I'm sending you something. Get our legal and compliance team on it the second it lands in your inbox. I need to know within the hour if this is real. What is it? Priya asked. Evidence that Richard Vance has been falsifying FAA required safety inspections to inflate the acquisition value of Meridian's regional fleet, Naomi said. If it's real, this isn't just about a hostile shareholder vote anymore. This is federal aviation law. This could ground his entire deal permanently, and it could put him in prison. There was a long pause on the line. Where did you get this? Priya finally asked. Naomi looked out the window at the endless blue sky, thinking of her father's voice, cracked and desperate, thinking of a 9-year-old girl who used to sit at a windowsill, waiting for a man who never came. From someone I never expected to help me, she said quietly. Get it verified. We land in 90 minutes. The remaining flight time passed in a blur of encrypted documents, urgent phone calls, and careful strategy. On the ground, Priya had assembled a small emergency team in a glass conference room at Carter Strategic Holdings, 3 compliance analysts and the company's outside aviation counsel, all of them staring at Marcus Carter's files spread across 2 monitors while a countdown clock on the wall ticked toward the shareholder meeting. Priya called Naomi 20 minutes later, her voice tight with focus. We're cross-referencing the tail numbers against the FAA's public inspection database now. 2 of the 3 aircraft show gaps exactly where your father's documents say they should. The 3rd is taking longer. The filing looks like it was altered after the fact. Altered how? Naomi asked, gripping the phone tighter. Somebody went back in and adjusted a timestamp on an inspection certificate to make it look like it happened 3 weeks earlier than it actually did, Priya said. That's not sloppy record-keeping, Naomi. That's someone covering their tracks on purpose. Can you prove it was altered? Our forensic analyst is on it right now. Give us 15 minutes. Those 15 minutes stretched into some of the longest of Naomi's life. She sat rigid in her seat, watching the clock in the corner of her tablet screen, running through contingency after contingency in her mind. What she would say if the evidence came back inconclusive, how she would still try to stop Diane O'Shea from signing with nothing but her father's word, and a handful of documents that might not hold up under scrutiny. She thought about how much easier this would all be if she simply trusted people less, felt less, cared less about 14,000 strangers, and one elderly widow, and a company that was never obligated to mean as much to her as it did. Priya called back at the 14th minute. It's confirmed. The metadata on the digital certificate shows it was modified 9 days ago, right around the time Halcyon's due diligence team requested updated maintenance records. Naomi, this isn't just falsification. This is obstruction. He knew someone might come looking, and he tried to clean it up in advance. Send everything to the FAA Inspector General's office the second you hang up with me, Naomi said. And loop in outside counsel. I want this filed formally, not just forwarded informally. I don't want any question later about the chain of custody on this evidence. Already drafting the cover letter, Priya said. Naomi, if this is even half as bad as it looks, Vance isn't just losing this deal. He could be looking at criminal charges. Good, Naomi said quietly, and for the first time since her father's phone call, allowed herself to feel something like relief. Priya's team confirmed within the hour that the maintenance logs Marcus had sent were authentic, cross-referenced against official FAA filing databases, and the discrepancies were exactly as Marcus had described. 3 aircraft, 22 documented instances, over 18 months of inspections marked complete that had never actually been performed, each one signed off by a maintenance supervisor who, Priya's investigation quickly revealed, had been receiving unusually large cash bonuses directly from an account linked to Richard Vance personally. This was not simply corporate greed anymore, this was fraud, aviation safety violations serious enough to trigger an immediate FAA investigation, serious enough to end a man's career and potentially his freedom. Naomi spent the final hour of the flight in quiet, focused preparation, drafting a statement for the board, coordinating with her legal team on the fastest possible path to present this evidence, and fighting the persistent, unwelcome thought of her father sitting somewhere, alone, having just handed her the single most valuable gift he had ever given her, decades too late to undo the damage of his absence, but perhaps, just perhaps, early enough to mean something now. When the plane finally touched down at LaGuardia, Naomi was first off the aircraft, Captain Whitfield personally escorting her to the jet bridge, shaking her hand warmly one final time. Good luck in there, Miss Carter. Whatever it is you're walking into, I have a feeling this airline is lucky to have you fighting for it. Thank you, James, Naomi said, and meant it entirely. Brittany, standing near the galley as passengers disembarked, caught Naomi's eye one last time. Miss Carter, she said quietly, I really am sorry about earlier. I think about who I decide deserves respect way too quickly, and I don't like what that says about me. Naomi paused, studying the young woman for a moment. Then change it, she said simply. Not because I own part of this airline, because it's the right thing to do, for the next passenger you meet, whoever they turn out to be. She left it there. No promise of consequences, no threat, simply a challenge, and walked briskly toward the terminal exit, where Priya was already waiting with a black car and a stack of printed documents. We have 50 minutes, Priya said, sliding into the car beside Naomi as it pulled away from the curb. Diane O'Shea is meeting with Vance's attorney right now at his offices, 3 blocks from the shareholder meeting location. Then we're going there first, Naomi said, already reviewing the documents in her lap. Naomi, that's incredibly aggressive, Priya said carefully. Showing up unannounced at a private meeting with evidence of federal fraud, that's a massive risk. If Vance's team sees this coming, They could try to destroy remaining evidence before we can present it formally. Which is exactly why we're not waiting for the formal meeting, Naomi said. Diane Osei is about to sign away her family's legacy for $2 million because she's tired and she doesn't know the whole truth. I'm not going to let that happen because I was worried about being polite. 20 minutes later, the car pulled up outside a gleaming glass office tower in Midtown Manhattan. Naomi walked into the lobby with Priya at her side, her posture entirely different now from the woman who had sat quietly accepting humiliation on a commercial flight just hours earlier. This was Naomi Carter, as her closest colleagues knew her, precise, commanding, utterly unshakable. She found the correct floor, and rather than waiting to be announced, walked directly into the conference room where Richard Vance, a tall, silver-haired man with an expensive suit and an expression that shifted from confusion to alarm the instant he recognized her, sat across from an elderly woman with kind, tired eyes and a fountain pen already hovering above a signature line. "Diane, don't sign that," Naomi said clearly, stepping into the room. Every head turned. Vance rose immediately, his face flushing with anger. "This is a private meeting. Miss Carter, you have no right to be here." "I have every right," Naomi said calmly. "I'm a majority shareholder in the company you're trying to dismantle, and I have information that directly affects the value and legality of the deal Mrs. Osei is about to sign on to." Diane Osei set her pen down slowly, studying Naomi with careful, curious eyes. "Miss Carter, I've heard a great deal about you over the years, though we've never formally met. My late husband always spoke highly of the woman who saved this airline when everyone else had given up on it. Your husband was right to trust in this company," Naomi said gently. "But right now, someone is trying to convince you to sell your family's legacy under false pretenses, and I think you deserve to know the truth before you make that decision permanently." Vance stepped forward, his voice hard and controlled, despite the panic clearly rising beneath the surface. "Miss Carter, this is theatrical and inappropriate. Whatever grievance you have with the direction of this company, there is a shareholder meeting in 40 minutes where you're welcome to raise it through proper channels." "The proper channel," Naomi said, turning to face him directly, "is Federal Aviation Authorities, Richard, because what I have in this folder is documentation proving you've been falsifying safety inspection reports on 3 regional aircraft for the past 18 months to artificially inflate this fleet's value ahead of a sale to Halcyon Capital." The color drained entirely from Vance's face. "That's a fabrication," he said, his voice rising sharply. "A desperate accusation from a shareholder who's losing a legitimate business vote." "It's not a fabrication," Naomi said, setting the folder on the table in front of Diane. "It's federal maintenance logs, cross-referenced against the actual FAA inspection database, showing 22 instances of falsified sign-offs, each one linked to cash payments from an account under your personal control to a maintenance supervisor willing to lie on official safety documents. People have been flying on those planes, Richard. Real families, children. My legal team has already forwarded this evidence to the FAA's Inspector General's office, as of 11 minutes ago." Vance's hands trembled slightly as he reached for the folder, flipping through the documents with increasing desperation, his composure cracking visibly with every page. "Where did you get this?" he demanded, though his voice had lost all its earlier authority. "From someone who realized, even after everything, that some mistakes are too dangerous to stay silent about," Naomi said quietly, thinking briefly of her father's cracked, desperate voice on the phone. Diane Osei had gone very still, staring at the documents Naomi had placed before her, her earlier weariness replaced now with something sharper, angrier. "Richard," she said slowly, "you told me this deal would preserve the safety standards my husband spent his entire career building into this airline. You told me Halcyon shared our values." "Diane, I can explain," Vance began. "You told me this was good business," Diane said, her voice rising now with real fury. You told me you had my family's legacy in mind. My husband gave 40 years of his life to aviation safety standards, Richard. 40 years. And you used my trust in you to help you commit fraud that could have gotten people killed, all so you could line your own pockets before selling this company out from under 14,000 employees. The safety margins were still within acceptable risk tolerances, Vance said weakly, and even he seemed to hear how hollow the excuse sounded the moment it left his mouth. There is no acceptable risk tolerance for falsified safety inspections, Naomi said firmly. Not one. Not ever. Vance's composure finally shattered entirely. You have no idea what it takes to run a company in this environment, he snapped, rounding on Naomi with real venom in his voice. You waltzed in here 5 years ago, with your rescue money and your restructuring plan, and everyone treated you like some kind of savior. Do you know what it's like to sit on a board with a woman who has never once had to answer to anyone, who bought her way into power and calls it merit? I didn't buy my way into anything, Richard, Naomi said, her voice deadly calm. I built a company from nothing while men like you inherited seats at tables they never had to earn. I put $180 million of my own money on the line when this airline was 6 weeks from liquidation, and you and the rest of the board were busy arguing about who would get blamed for letting it fail. I didn't call myself a savior. 14,000 employees who still have paychecks called me that, and I never asked them to. This industry chews people up, Vance said, quieter now, something almost desperate creeping into his voice. I was trying to get out before it chewed me up too. You were trying to get rich by lying about the safety of airplanes carrying children, Naomi said. Don't dress it up as survival. Call it what it is. Diane Osei, still standing with the torn signature page in her hand, looked at Richard Vance with an expression of profound, weary disgust. I trusted you with my husband's legacy, Richard. I trusted you because you sat in our living room and told me you understood what this company meant to him. Her voice cracked slightly, the first real emotion she had shown since Naomi walked into the room. You didn't understand anything except what you could extract from it before anyone noticed. Diane Osei picked up her pen, and for one terrible moment, Naomi feared she intended to sign the sale documents anyway, exhausted, defeated, wanting simply to be done with the entire ordeal. Instead, Diane tore the signature page cleanly in half, set the pen down, and stood. I'm not signing anything today, she said. And Richard, I fully intend to vote my shares against this sale at the meeting in 35 minutes, and I expect the board will have significantly more urgent matters to discuss than a hostile acquisition once federal investigators arrive. The emergency shareholder meeting that afternoon looked nothing like the coronation Richard Vance had spent 8 months carefully engineering. Federal investigators, alerted by Naomi's legal team, arrived at the building just as the meeting was scheduled to begin, and Vance was quietly escorted out by 2 FAA officials before the meeting even reached its second agenda item: his career, his reputation, and very likely his freedom collapsing in the span of a single afternoon. Diane Osei voted her shares against the sale. Several smaller shareholders, watching the scandal unfold in real time and suddenly desperate to distance themselves from any association with fraud, quickly followed her lead. The sale to Halcyon Capital collapsed entirely within the hour, and the board, shaken and humbled, unanimously voted to appoint Naomi Carter as Meridian Airlines' new interim chairwoman, a position she had never sought but now felt a fierce, protective responsibility to accept. Standing at the front of that boardroom afterward, looking out at faces that had doubted her, underestimated her, and in some cases actively worked against her for years, Naomi felt something settle deep in her chest. Not triumph exactly, but a hard-won, earned peace. 14,000 people's jobs were nearly sold out from under them today, for a payout that would have lined the pockets of exactly 2 men, Naomi said to the room. I don't intend to run this airline as a monument to my own success. I intend to run it as proof that doing right by people and doing good business were never actually in conflict, no matter how many times someone tried to convince all of you otherwise. That evening, Naomi sat alone in her hotel room, overlooking the New York skyline, finally allowing herself a moment of stillness after a day that had asked everything of her. Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from her father. I know I have no right to ask for anything from you. I just needed you to know I'm proud of the woman you became, even though I had almost nothing to do with it. If you ever want to talk, really talk, I'll be here. And if you don't, I understand. I love you, Naomi. I always have, even when I was terrible at showing it. Naomi stared at the message for a long time, feeling the old familiar ache mixed now with something new and unfamiliar. Something almost like the beginning of forgiveness. Not full, not complete, but a door left slightly open rather than slammed permanently shut. She typed back a single line. Thank you for telling the truth when it mattered most. That's a start. It was not everything. It was not the childhood she had lost, the years of absence that could never be returned to her, the birthdays and school recitals and quiet nights when she had needed a father who simply was not there. But it was something honest, and honest. Naomi had learned over a lifetime of building an empire from nothing was where every real rebuilding had to begin. 6 months later, Meridian Airlines posted its strongest quarterly earnings in a decade, driven not by cutting corners or gutting its workforce, but by exactly the kind of careful, principled leadership Naomi had built her entire career on. She personally funded a new mechanic apprenticeship program, named after her grandfather, the man who had once been forbidden from working in an aviation hangar because of the color of his skin, and watched with quiet pride as the first graduating class, diverse, talented, and hungry for opportunity, received their certifications in a hangar that now proudly bore his name. Brittany Cole, the flight attendant who had once tried to remove Naomi from her own seat, requested a transfer to the Customer Relations Training Department, where she now helped design a new employee training program focused specifically on unconscious bias and equitable treatment of every passenger, regardless of how they were dressed or what assumptions a stranger might make about them at first glance. She sent Naomi a handwritten letter thanking her for the lesson, and Naomi kept it in her desk drawer as a quiet reminder of how far grace could travel when given the chance. Richard Vance was formally indicted on federal fraud charges related to falsified aviation safety records, his career in the industry over permanently, his reputation destroyed beyond repair, a consequence entirely of his own making. And Naomi Carter, the woman who had once been a little girl waiting at a windowsill for a father who never came, now stood at the front of hangars and boardrooms alike, having built something far greater than any single person's approval could ever have given her. An empire rooted not in what she had been denied, but in everything she had refused to let that denial turn her into. She had learned in the end that the people who underestimated her, on airplanes, in boardrooms, in the quiet corners of her own childhood, were never actually the point. The point had always been what she chose to build in spite of them, and now, finally, that legacy belonged entirely to her, unshakable, undeniable, and completely, powerfully her own. If this story moved you even a little, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more powerful stories of resilience, justice, and success. Thank you so much for watching until the very end.